Hey everybody, it's Carpo again. This will be part two of my video that I just made. I never really got back to the alien thing, and what I was talking about was this idea that whenever they show aliens in movies or whatnot, they're always like humans. And I was explaining how the brain size of a human is the most ideal size, according to science, for us to function, think, and do the things we need to do, as well as reason the way we do. And any larger it gets awkward, and any smaller and we can't retain the amount of information we need. And people would dispute that by saying we only use 10% of our brain and whatnot. But from what I understand, the recent science has shown that that's not true at all, that we just only utilize certain parts at certain times. So anyway, beyond that, the question I asked was, why would aliens look like humans? Why would they look at all like us? Why would they have a nose on the front of their face? Why would they have eyes facing forward like we do? And historically, through evolutionary studies, to the best of our abilities, we found that humans and other creatures, the reason why we're all so similar is not just because we have a common ancestor, as much as because nature chooses particular patterns. Nature has a preference for life. And so the argument would go, one side would say that the way we look, the reason we look like we look, and that animals look the way they look, is by complete evolutionary random mutation. Now, as much as I'm definitely not a religious person, I just can't believe that. There's just no way that I could ever believe that all these creatures, and that may sound ignorant to some, but to me, I cannot see how evolution can take foothold the way it does and move forward without having some sort of a purpose or a reason. And now I understand both sides of the picture, because I used to be on the other side of the coin, where I would say, oh, well, people are just trying to justify religion or make an excuse by saying, there must be a God, because look around you, look at all the beauty, it's crazy. I always found that to be a bad argument as to the fact that there was a God. So my own studies took me down roads where I couldn't dispute anymore. I understand some people will argue that the eyeball is too perfect, and how could it be reduced, and why was where was the creator of the eyeball, because it had to form in particular stages, that any one particular stage by itself won't necessarily produce any usable eye. So therefore, there had to be a blueprint, if you will, in mind. Now, I don't know what side of this argument I'm on. I'm not really involved in it, and I can't speculate any more than the next person. All I can do is read as many books as I can. And let me tell you, doing all the research I've done in my life is what's really opened my eyes to others who claim that they've done so much research, because I know how long it takes to do research on things. I know how much time it takes to do one particular subject and delve into it deep enough to understand it. And in that same regard, I know that none of these people who claim to be all-knowing really are in all these subjects. I say that because it seems like scientists are often very adamant about saying, well, that's just not possible because of this or because of this, but they're missing certain other points. Being a jack of all trades, a person who seeks many different ideas, I'm able to orchestrate my thoughts in a way that gives me a general idea of whether something is true or not. Now, this is what logos is. In my definition of logos, which is using your own common sense, which there is a common sense, there is a common right or a common truth among people, although we may not know what it is. But the logos is that common truth, the common truth that binds us together, that gets us where we're going, wherever that may be. But the logos is the search, and you are on a constant path of trying to use rational explanation to understand the things around you. At least, most of us are. And it's really hard to deal with irrational people. But at the same time, I understand, what I'm saying is I understand both sides of the coin, because I've seen both sides of the argument. And now I don't really have a particular side. I just choose to, well, I keep my mind open. I keep my ears open. I do as much research on things as I can. And I think it's fascinating, the idea that life on this planet may evolve just like other planets, which is, I started off talking about the alien thing. That's, this is all part of the same thing to me. The idea that DNA itself is more than just a packet of information that's passed from one thing to another. If the fact is that life can really be passed through light, then that DNA is nothing more than, as they've said, an antenna of sorts. And I know a lot of people would say, well, yeah, that's obvious. We know that DNA is this or that, but most of this is speculation. The research I've done on people claiming that DNA is this or that, or that we have this many strands of inactive DNA, and that I've seen people selling $500 courses where you can activate your 12 strands of DNA. And these people talk very matter-of-factly, as if, well, yes, of course it is. But if you look into the science, they're trying their hardest to understand what DNA really is, but it's not like they have a close-up, detailed picture of it or a real understanding of it. It's a very complicated thing. So my thought is like this. Think of it as a projector, You can shine these cosmic waves through DNA and project it upon other beings. It's almost as if you are creating a hologram, if you will. And this is where a lot of the holographic universe theories tie in. And it's a very complex subject. Now there's a book. It's called The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot. I wanted to read you a part, so I just went to look for it, but it's not there. I guess I loaned it out to someone who never returned it. That's the way it goes with books around here. But this book I read about 10 years ago, and it was a real eye-opener for me. It really explained this idea that everything is a projection. And it fed off of something that I had already studied when I was about 11 or I think I was 11 or 12 years old. I had this book, and we had the All About books in our house, and anyone 80s kid might know what I'm talking about. It's just a series of small books that are called All About this, All About chemistry is the one that I kept. And I read it thoroughly when I was young, and I was fascinated by it. And in this book they were talking about how the atoms are actually energy bound together. And the book was written in, I think, the 50s. So, it was an old book. And back then they were really still fascinated with these things. And a lot of these older 50s books still explain nuclear technology in layman terms so people can actually understand it. Because these days people are overwhelmed. Get some older literature. It's out there. It's really interesting. And a lot of the ideas have not changed, the principle of atoms. And the idea that an atom is mostly empty space. And I remember walking down the sidewalk thinking, this is all just bound together by energy, And it wasn't until years later when I understood frequency, when I started to think that there could be a projected frequency that is keeping things together. And then years later I read that book, and it was the invisible, the holographic universe, and that really tied the few together. And then I got in and started understanding cymatics, which cymatics is the science of sound's effect on materials such as sand or water. If you play a particular frequency, you can alter the structure of a visible plate of, say, sand, and you can create patterns by changing the frequency, and the patterns are very consistent and they're crystalline. And what this shows to me is that, it's just amazing, the idea of what it really means, because I think people don't realize that it's pretty. That's great. But what this low frequency is doing is it's holding matter together in a particular shape. Now, of course, when you take the frequency apart, it falls apart. And when you change the frequency, it changes structure. And since it's large objects or large plate of water or sand, it's not necessarily something that's going to hold together. Something on a minute nanoscale can be held together by frequencies, because that's the nature of gravity and the way the electrons work with one another, all that jargon. So science is showing now that sound can create matter, or at least hold matter together in a particular shape. In that sense, there really is something to the idea of a galactic wave or a cosmic wave that could alter the structure, the crystalline structure that is the basis of our DNA. And since it may be like an antenna, and since you can project light through it, or some sort of a wave through it, perhaps it can share that with other DNA. And this is, this is already something I believe is completely in existence right now, that when you spend time with people, even family, they've found that people are affected genetically, not just by relation. A mother-daughter may have genetic diseases that run in the family, but the reality is that they found that adopted kids that were given out to other families, they would take on the genetic diseases of the family that there was adopted family. And it was a pretty fascinating, realization to see that when we're in the company of others, we're affected by their emotions, we're affected by their diseases and sicknesses. I was trying to explain this to my mom the other day, because she was talking about how she caught a cold from the kids, because we all had a cold that we caught. My thought is that although colds are transmitted through, and viruses are transmitted through the air, I believe that they're also transmitted close quarters through cosmic waves. In other words, if they've shown that a light can pass through one test tube into another and transmit a virus or some sort of life, I believe that it may not necessarily move the virus itself, but it may project that virus onto other tissue or organic matter and create a new virus out of it. In other words, it's a holographic reproduction of itself. This is far-fetched to a lot of people, but this is one of the subjects that I really do have faith in. That one of the things that, I wouldn't say faith, but that the evidence that's been presented for it is overwhelming. And science isn't talking about it because science can't explain it. And whenever science can't explain something, then it's out of the general paradigm. And most of the people who have worked on these subjects are considered pseudoscientists and ridiculed, and that's fine. I understand the ridicule, because some of these theories proposed are extreme and they can't be measured, but they can be seen. And we have to remember that so many of the things that cannot be measured subjectively or objectively, some of these things can be measured through other means. There are terms for these things, but I'm not that wise, but there's that they're measured through their impact on the environment around them. So in other words, radiation is a perfect example. When radiation was discovered, it was unknown. I can't remember the fellow who discovered it, but he had some uranium, I believe, some uranium-rich rock that he put in a drawer. When he pulled it out, he had some film in a drawer next to it, and when he pulled it out later, the film had been exposed. He couldn't figure out how or why. Eventually, his curiosity led him to understand that the rock in the drawer above had projected that image through the radiation. And this is how radiation was discovered. Before that, people had been talking about these little waves of energy that could affect us, and they were just laughed at all the time, until somebody finally could prove it through a measurable device, which was something as simple as film, and then X-rays were developed, and here we are. So before we discard this idea as too ludicrous, we should look at the evidence, and I think that there's ample evidence to support the fact that there may be something to light transmitting information. DNA. Peace out, everybody. I'll leave it at that. Namaste.